hear me fine?
Yep.
A?
So, good morning, everybody. My company, Hammerfall Carpentry, is what it says, offers carpentry services to the greater Cleveland area. And of course, bonded and insured. I have over 15 years of experience. The first company I started back in 2013 was doing basically just general remodeling and just kind of more handyman stuff. And then I curtailed it all into doing more high-end remodeling, and then essentially now, when I rebranded last year in 2025, it is focusing solely on trim work. I do handle basically all aspects of carpentry, however, trim would be the ideal. So we do everything from rough framing to, which would be framing additions or framing just new rooms, any kind of new location stuff, framing modification, which would be like for any other trade that, you don't want your plumber putting 6-inch holes through all the framing, you don't want your HVAC guy cutting out the joists, so the proper way to do it is to reframe, call me, we can take care of something like that. And then, of course, the trim carpentry aspect, which is everything from just doing baseboards and casings to all the way on up to custom built-ins or, fireplace mantles, stuff like that. And the custom millwork aspect is kind of something I'll get into a little bit later in this, but that would be a bit more like if you're doing wainscoting or judges paneling, or if you wanted closet built-in cabinets made. I don't do production cabinets, but if it's something for like a custom project, that would be something I would work on. And I am a visual learner, so I don't have a lot of bullet points. Hopefully you can see these pictures okay. This would basically be with the rough framing aspect of it. So we have everything from structural framing, which is like what you would see here. And in this instance, we had some headers that needed to be raised up because they wanted to have a straight seam ceiling all the way through. So that requires all kinds of temp framing, bracing, whatever you need to do to then cut the framing and raise it up. This same thing, structural framing, something over here, this is just basically framing for an addition, and kind of goes without saying. This stuff right here would be something that would be considered non-structural framing to an extent, because basically this is like next to an abandoned elevator shaft, and we wanted to add stairs going to the 3rd floor to basically make it like an Airbnb, so it has 2 accessible, forms of egress. So all of this stuff here, which is basically just a carrier for drywall, would be considered non-structural, and something right here where it actually is supporting the landing for the stairs, and this was basically framed up, and they got a pre-made set of stairs that was then dropped into our framing specifications. And then something like this over here is, again, half structural, half not. This instance here, it had a fireplace that was being put in. The header was too low, so we had to come in, chop it out, temp frame everything, raise the header up here, and hopefully you guys can see the pictures. I know they're kind of small. And then this picture here is the same one. So the one behind it, which is this, is actually the structural one, and the one in front of it is basically just the carrier for the fireplace, and of course, meeting combustible clearances as we go. And then something like this, again, would just be the temp framing so that we can come in and, take out walls and chop in new LVLs. So again, we handle everything from structural to non-structural, all of that stuff. The trim carpentry aspect would be, it's a very broad category. Of course, anything from installing cabinets to installing handrails. And then, so this one here, we left the existing metal railing, or the metal, I guess you would call it, it's not really balusters, but let's just, for what the sake is, we left the metal frame and just topped everything with new white oak railings. It's kind of more of a pain doing it that way because you are left at the mercy of someone that maybe over time they beat up the railings too bad and it's not quite square, it's not quite plumb. Turns into a bit more of a pain, but all of this stuff essentially gets measured, cut, pre-assembled, and then we assemble it all as one piece. Instance here, we set new posts, which is like a little mezzanine that looks over the 2nd floor. This one here was a complete tear-off, so we did new treads, new risers, new railings and balusters, and you can't see it on the other side, but there's actually some framing and like a little knee wall on the side of that. And then this is, again, railings, and we did some wainscoting down the stairwell wall. Also do exterior trim. So this house had a leak, and this is all wrapped in aluminum, and something like this we did everything was wrapped in AZEK, and I'll actually touch on that later because this one, it doesn't look like much, but all of those pieces had to be essentially cut and measured, assembled off of the house itself, and then put together, and then kind of put together like a puzzle. So, and then this is just like another close-up shot. You can see all the joints, how everything was basically assembled that way. And this one is kind of like the crown jewel. This is a coffered ceiling we did in Hinkley, and this one was an absolute nightmare because the room was out of square by about 5/8 in every direction. So you can do something like a coffered ceiling. Okay, you can do a coffered ceiling in an instance where you can just throw up some boards and kind of call it done, or you can do it the right way, which is how we would pride ourselves on doing it, is squaring everything, building a skeleton for it, dropping in panels so everything is completely leveled with a laser, and then going around and pre-assembling all the boxes and all the crown and installing everything in pieces. And then this is the custom millwork spec. So this here is just a storm door. I know it doesn't look fancy, but this is actually something I made out of redwood for a customer that specifically wanted redwood. And a lot of work goes into doing something that is essentially very basic, but again, it's a ton of work. And you can buy one off the shelf, but it's not gonna be redwood. This is Judge's paneling, and what we had happen here was a leak that came down and destroyed everything. So all of the stuff that you see in the red is historic cherry from a house that's like, you know, early 1900s, and it all needed to be made and replaced with, you know, new cherry. And the problem when you do that is old growth cherry doesn't look like new growth cherry because it hasn't been growing for a couple hundred years. So in order to make everything match, all of the cherry that you see that's not red was replaced, but all of the panels are actually the existing panels that we made. That we made one new existing panel, the old two were actually veneered with all of the same cherry cut from the same veneer so that it all matches when it stands up. And then this is a fireplace mantle that we did. Obviously it's just more like a wainscoting style, but this was done over a masonry fireplace, and I have another picture that'll kind of show that later on. But this is all the crown, the mantle, the base, and all the paneling, all of that stuff, again, was made on site precisely to fit that exact space. So about the business, basically the way that I work is I am there to bridge the gap because I'm a smaller company. So anything like general contractors, designers, or other trades, that really is my bread and butter because I don't have the workforce big enough to handle giant projects like that. So in an instance here, like something like this would be, these are faux beams that all had to be cut and scribed on site to fit, and they're about 25, 30 feet in the air. That's something that I can do pretty regularly, but I can't do it by myself, so I work with another carpenter that calls me in when essentially they need that other hand to get it done. This is an addition that you saw earlier that was framed. Again, he doesn't have a full crew, so he would call me in, I would help out with the framing, and then that's essentially the final result. You see the swoop on the roof, which they had to have for whatever reason. And then this is an example of another coffered ceiling done in a different way. Still looks nice, kind of run into more headaches when you don't want to do it the way I originally explained. But again, you know, maybe they didn't have the crew to tackle all that all at once, so while they're working on stuff like doing stone or doing the floor, I can kind of jump in and give them a hand with doing something like the trim with the ceiling. And then of course, you know, really pride myself on the attention to detail, because you can come, you know, anybody can do custom stuff, and you see it a lot in like home builders where, you know, they just kind of grab whatever or whoever and they say, I want custom cabinets, and they throw them in, and you could tell that they were thrown in. So like this is a basement build out that I helped out with, and this was all done framed up soffit, and this is like a stamped copper ceiling that was installed, and it actually has a copper crown that wraps around. It's a stamped tin made to look like copper, but just kind of wrapping around. And again, it's just very detail oriented. This is just a close-up shot of the Judge's paneling you saw earlier. Whereas like, and this is also a mortise and tenon install, so there's no hardware. It's all cut and dadoed to basically fit into the joints, and then the bead molding is the only thing that's shot on there. And then this is a custom closet build out that we did. And basically we built the cabinet, all the drawer fronts, the boxes, everything in there was built on site to the specs of the room. And then this is just I'm near the end of it, but this is just basically kind of the direction that you go when you're doing a mantle top, and you know, you can't have gaps everywhere because you're gonna see filler, you're gonna see caulk, stuff like that. So in order to get a tight fit, I generally template everything because it takes longer, but you want it to look perfect when you're all done. So this is just kind of like touching on the things that you do to go the extra mile to make it look better. These are what I was saying where you're veneering old panels. So this was the old one from the judge's panel that was veneered. These are the veneers themselves and the two that we made, and basically what you do is you set everything in glue, heat it up, wait till it sucks down, shrinks in, and then you have new veneers. And of course, keeping in mind the proper grain orientation as well, because it needs to all go the same way. And then this is the exterior trim I was talking about. So this is actually a piece which is the centerpiece right here, and it comes together almost like roughly like a 22-ish degree angle, and this is all made from separate pieces that you basically have to come to measurements, miter everything, glue it all together, make sure it doesn't have any joints, make sure it doesn't crack when you put up. Unfortunately, we did do this when it was about 4 degrees outside, so that made it way worse, but it actually turned out really nice. And then this is from the coffered ceiling, and just kind of to touch on everything being pre-assembled, this is all the crown, and this is just kind of one of the more intricate areas of it. But all of this stuff gets assembled, glued, screwed, stapled to the back, let it set up overnight, let everything dry, and then it just gets tapped into place and shot in. So again, you could try to piece it. Some stuff you can coat, some stuff you can't, but to me, for something like this, it's just way better to do it all in one shot. You know it's right, you put it in, and then you're done. And that's basically the gist on what would be a good referral for me. So I do handle all aspects of it. It's just for me, I really enjoy doing like the trim or the custom stuff. That's really my bread and butter. So, any questions?
Really cool.